Chapter 8 Stalemate. Bellarion and Barbaresco sat at supper, waited upon by an untidy and unclean old man who afforded all the service of that decayed establishment. The fare was frugal, more frugal far than the convent of Sigliano had afforded out of Lent, and the wine was thin and sharp. When the repast was done and the old servant, having lighted candles, had retired, Bellarion startled his host by the portentous gravity of his tone. "My lord, you and I must talk. I told you that Her Highness sends no answer to your message, which is a truth, and all that you could expect, since there was no message and consequently could be no answer. I did not tell you, however, that she sends you a message which is in some sense an answer to certain suspicions that I voiced to her." Barbaresco's mouth fell open, and the stare of his blue eyes grew fixed. Clearly he was startled, and clearly paused to command himself before asking, "Why did you not tell me this before?" "I preferred to wait, so as to make sure of not going supperless. It may, of course, offend you that I should have communicated my suspicions to Her Highness. But the poor lady was so downcast by your inaction that to cheer her I venture the opinion that you are perhaps not quite so aimless as you wish to appear. Whatever his convent education may have done for him, it does not seem, as you will long since have gathered, that it inculcated a strict regard for exactitude. Dissimulation, I fear, was bred in the bones of him, although he would have answered any such charge by informing you that Plato had taught him to distinguish between the lie on the lips and the lie in the heart." "Oh, but proceed." "The opinion." Barbaresco fiercely challenged him. "You'll remember what Count Spigno said before you others checked him. The arbalester, you remember." Bellarion appeared to falter a little under the glare of those blue eyes and the fierce set of that heavy jaw. "So I told Her Highness, to raise her drooping spirits, that one of these fine days her friends in Casale might cut the Gordian knot with a crossbow shaft." Barbaresco suggested by his attitude a mastiff crouching for a spring. "Ah," he commented. And she said, "The very contrary of what I expected. Where I looked for elation, I found only distress. It was in vain I pleaded with her that thus a consummation would speedily be reached, that if such a course had not yet been determined, it was precisely the course that I should advocate. Oh, you pleaded that, and she bade me tell you that if such a thing were indeed in your minds, you must dismiss it, that she would be no party to it, that sooner she would herself denounce the intention to the Marquis Theodore. Body of God!" Barbaresco came to his feet, his great face purple, the veins of his temples standing forth like cords whilst appearing unmoved. Bellarion braced his muscles for action. The attack came, but only in words. Barbaresco heaped horrible and obscene abuse upon Bellarion's head. "You infamous fool! You triple ass! You chattering ape!" With these, amongst other terms, the young man found himself bombarded. Get you back to her, and tell her, you numbskull baboon, that there was never any such intention. But was there not? Bellarion cried with almost shrill ingenuousness of tone. "Yet Count Spigno—" "Devil take Count Spigno, fool. Heed me. Carry my message to Her Highness." "I carry no lies," said Bellarion firmly, and rose with great dignity. "Lies!" gurgled Barbaresco. "Lies!" Bellarion insisted. "Let us have done with them. To Her Highness I expressed as a suspicion what in my mind was a clear conviction. The words Count Spigno used, and your anxiety to silence him, could leave no doubt in any man of wit, and I am that, I hope, my lord. If you will have this message carried, you will first show me the ends you serve by its falsehood, and let me, who am in this thing as deep as any, be the judge of whether it is justified." Before this firmness the wrath went out of Barbaresco. Weakly he wrung his hands a moment, then sank sagging into his chair. If the others, if Cavalcani or Casella, had known how much you had understood, you would never have left this house alive, lest you should do precisely what you have done. But if it is on her behalf, hers and her brother's, that you planned this thing, why should you not take her feeling first? What else is right or fair? Her feeling? Barbaresco sneered, and Bellarion understood that the sneer was for himself. God deliver me from the weariness of reasoning with a fool. Our bolt would have been shot, and none could have guessed the hands that loosed it. Now you have made it known, and you need be told what will happen if we were mad enough to go through with it. Why? The Princess Valeria would be our instant accuser. She would come forth at once and denounce us. That is the spirit of her, willful, headstrong, and mawkish. And I am a fool to bid you go back to her and persuade her that you were mistaken. When the blow fell, she would see that what you had first told was the truth, and our heads would pay. He set his elbows on the table, took his head in his hands, and fetched a groan from his great bulk. The ruin you have wrought. God, the ruin. Ruin, quoth Bellarion, of all our hopes, Barbaresco explained in petulance. Can't you see it? Can you understand nothing for yourself, animal, save the things you were better for not understanding? And can't you see that you have ruined yourself with us? With your face and shape, and already close in the Lady Valeria's confidence as you are, there are no heights in the state to which you might not have climbed. I had not thought of it, said Bellarion, sighing. No, nor of me, nor of any of us. Of me. The man's grief became passionate. At last I might have sloughed this beggary in which I live. And now, he banged the table in his sudden rage and got to his feet again. That is what you have done. That is what you have wrecked by your silly babbling. But surely, sir, by other means. There are no other means. Leastways, no other means at our command. Have we the money to levy troops? Oh, why do I waste my breath upon you? You'll tell the others tomorrow what you've done, and they shall tell you what they think of it. It was a course that had its perils. But if once in the stillness of the night Bellarion's shrew which counseled him to rise, dress, and be gone, he stilled the coward counsel. It remained to be seen whether the other conspirators would be as easily intimidated as Barbaresco. To ascertain this, Bellarion determined to remain. The Lady Valeria's need of him was not yet done, he thought, though why the Lady Valeria's affair should be the cause of his exposing himself to the chances of a blade between the ribs was perhaps more than he could satisfactorily have explained. That the danger was very far from imaginary, the next morning's conference showed him. Scarcely had the plotters realized the nature of Bellarion's activities than they were clamoring for his blood. Casella, the exile, breathing fire and slaughter, would have sprung upon him with dagger drawn, had not Barbaresco bodily interposed. Not in my house, he roared. Not in my house. His only concern being the matter of his own incrimination. Nor anywhere, unless you are bent on suicide, Bellarion calmly warned them. He moved from behind Barbaresco to confront them. You are forgetting that in my murder the Lady Valeria will see your answer. She will denounce you, sirs, not only for this, but for the intended murder of the regent. Slay me, and you just as surely slay yourselves. He permitted himself to smile as he looked upon their stricken faces. It's an interesting situation, known in chess as a stalemate. In their baffled fury, they turned upon Count Spigno, whose indiscretion had created this situation. Enzo Spigno, sitting there with a sneer on his white face, let the storm rage. When at last it abated, he expressed himself. Rather should you thank me for having tested the ground before we stand on it. For the rest, it is as I expected. It is an ill thing to be associated with a woman in these matters. We did not bring her in, said Barbaresco. It was she who appealed to me for assistance. And now that we are ready to afford her, said Casella, she discovers that it is not of the sort she wishes. I say it is not hers to choose. Hopes have been raised in us, and we have labored to fulfill them. How they all harped on that, thought Bellarion. How concerned was each with the profit that he hoped to wrest for himself. How enraged to see himself cheated of this profit. The Lady Valeria, the state, the boy who was being corrupted that he might be destroyed. These things were nothing to these men. Not once did he hear them mentioned now in the futile, disorderly debate that followed, whilst he sat a little apart and almost forgotten. At last it was Spigno, the Spigno whom they dubbed a fool, but who, after all, had more wit than all of them together, who discovered and made the counter move. You there, Master Bellarion, he called. Here is what you are to tell your lady in answer to her threat. We who have set our hands to this task of ridding the state of the regent's thraldom will not draw back. We go forward with this thing as seems best to us, and we are not to be daunted by threats. Make it clear to this arrogant lady that she cannot betray us without at the same time betraying herself, that whatever fate she invokes upon us will certainly overtake her as well. It may be that she has already perceived and weighed that danger, said Bellarion. Aye, as a danger, but perhaps not as a certainty. And tell her also that she as certainly dooms her brother. Make her understand that it is not so easy to play with the souls of men as she supposes, and that here she has evoked forces which it is not within her power to lay again. He turned to his associates. Be sure that when she perceives precisely where she stands, she will cease to trouble us with her qualms either now or when the thing is done. Bellarion had mockingly pronounced the situation interesting, when by a shrewd presentment of it, he had given pause to the murderous rage of the conspirators. Considering it later that day as he took the air along the river brink, he was forced to confess it more disturbingly interesting even than he had shown it to be. He had not been blind to that weakness in the Lady Valeria's position, but he had been foolishly complacent, like the skillful chess player who, perceiving a strong move possible to his opponent, takes it for granted that the opponent himself will not perceive it. It seemed to him that nothing remained but to resume his interrupted pilgrimage to Pavia, leaving the state of Montferrat and the Lady Valeria to settle their own affairs. But in that case, her own ruin must inevitably follow, precipitated by the action of those ruffians with whom she was allied, whether that action succeeded or failed. Then he asked himself what to him were the affairs of Montferrat and its princess, that he should risk his life upon them. He fetched a sigh. The abbot had been right. There is no peace in this world outside a convent wall. Certainly there was no peace in Montferrat. Let him shake the dust of that place of unrest from his feet and push on towards Pavia and the study of Greek. And so, by olive grove and vineyard, he wandered on, assuring himself that it was towards Pavia that he now went, and repeating to himself that he would reach the seizure before nightfall and seek shelter in some hamlet thereabouts. Yet dusk saw him re-entering Casale by the Lombard gate, which faces eastwards, and this because he realized that the service he had shouldered was a burden not so lightly to be cast aside. If he forsook her now, the vision of her tawny head and wistful eyes would go with him to distract him with reproach. Chapter 9. The Marquis Theodore. The high and mighty Marquis Theodore Paleologo, regent of Montferrat, gave audience, as was his gracious custom, each Saturday to all who sought it, and received petitions from all who proffered them. A fine man, this Marquis Theodore, standing fully 6 feet tall, of a good shape and soldierly carriage, despite his 50 years. His countenance was amiable and open with boldly chiseled features and healthily tanned skin. Affable of manner, accessible of person, he nowise suggested the schemer. The privilege of audience, which he granted so freely, was never abused, so that on the Saturday of this week with which we are dealing, the attendance in the audience chamber was as usual of modest proportions. His Highness came, attended by his Chancellor and his Captain of Justice, and followed by 2 secretaries. He made a leisurely progress through the chamber, pausing at every other step to receive his one, or to say a word to that one, and at the end of an hour depart again, one of his secretaries bearing away the single petition that had been proffered, and this by a tall, dark-haired young man who was vividly dressed in scarlet. Within 5 minutes of the regent's withdrawal, that same secretary returned in quest of the tall young man in red. "Are you named Kane, sir?" The tall young man bowed acknowledgment, and was ushered into a small, pleasant chamber, whose windows overlooked the gardens with which Bellarion had already made acquaintance. The secretary closed the door, and Bellarion found himself under the scrutiny of a pair of close-set pale eyes whose glance was crafty and penetrating. Cross-legged, the party-colored hose revealed by the fall of the rich gown of mulberry velvet, the regent sat in a high-backed chair of leather wrought with stags' heads in red and gold, his left elbow resting upon a carved writing pulpit. Between hands that were long and fine, he held a parchment cylinder, in which Bellarion recognized the pretended petition he had proffered. "Who are you, sir?" The voice was calm and level, the voice of a man who does not permit his accents to advertise his thoughts. "My name is Bellarion Kane. I am the adoptive son of Bonifacio Kane, Count of Biandrate." Since he had found it necessary for his present purposes to adopt a father, Bellarion had thought it best to adopt one whose name must carry weight, and at need afford protection. Therefore he conferred this honor of paternity upon that great soldier, Facino Kane, who was ducal governor of Milan. There was a flash of surprise from the eyes that conned him. "You are Facino's son. You come from Milan, then?" "No, my lord, from the Augustinian convent at Sigliano, where my adoptive father left me some years ago whilst he was still in the service of Montferrat. It was hoped that I might take the habit, but a restlessness of spirit has urged me to prefer the world." Thus he married pure truth to the single falsehood he had used, the extent of which was to clothe the obscure soldier who had befriended him with the identity of the famous soldier he had named. But why the world of Montferrat? Chance determined that. I bore letters from my abbot to help me on my way. It was thus I made the acquaintance of the Lord Barbaresco, and his lordship, becoming interested in me, and no doubt requiring me for certain services, desired me to remain. He urged that here was a path already open to my ambition, which if steadily pursued might lead to eminence. There was no falsehood in the statement. It was merely truth untruly told, truth unassailable under test, yet calculated to convey a false impression. A thin smile parted the prince's shaven lips. And when you had learned sufficient, you found that a surer path to advancement might lie in the betrayal of these poor conspirators? That, Highness, is to set the unworthiest interpretation upon my motives. Bellarion made a certain show in his tone and manner of offended dignity, such as might become the venal rascal he desired to be considered. You will not dispute that the course you have taken argues more intelligence than honesty or loyalty. Your Highness reproaches me with lack of loyalty to traitors. What was their treason to you? What loyalty do you owe to me? You have but looked to see where lies your profit. Well, you are worthy to be the son, adoptive or natural, of that rascal Facino. You follow closely in his footsteps, and if you survive the perils of the journey, you may go as far. Highness, I came to serve you. Silence. The pleasant voice was scarcely raised. I am speaking. I understand your service perfectly. I know something of men, and if I choose to use you, it is because your hope of profit may keep you loyal, and because I shall know how to detect disloyalty and how to punish it. You engage, sir, in a service full of perils. The regent seemed faintly to sneer, but you have thrust yourself willingly into it. It will test you sternly and at every step. If you survive the tests, if you conquer the natural baseness and dishonesty of your nature, you shall have no cause to complain of my generosity. Bellarion flushed despite himself under the cold contempt of that level voice, and the amused contempt of those calm, pale eyes. The quality of my service should lead your Highness to amend your judgment. Is it at fault? Will you tell me? Then, whence springs a regard out of which you betray to me the aims and names of these men who befriended you? Bellarion threw back his head, and in his bold, dark eyes was kindled a flame of indignation. Inwardly, he was a little uneasy to find the regent accepting his words so readily, and upon such slight examination. Your Highness, he choked, will give me leave to go. But his Highness smiled, savoring his power to torture souls where lesser tyrants could torture only bodies. When I have done with you, you came at your own pleasure. You abide at mine. Now tell me, sir, besides the names you have here set down to these men who seek my life, do you know of any others who work in concert with them? I know that there are others whom they are laboring to seduce. Who these others are I cannot say, nor, with submission, need it matter to your Highness. These are the leaders. Once these are crushed, the others will be without direction. A seven-headed hydra, of which these are the heads. If I lop off these heads... He paused. Yes, but have you heard none others named in these councils? He leaned forward a little, his eyes intent upon Bellarion's face. None who are nearer to me? Think well, Master Bellarion, and be not afraid to name names, however great. Bellarion perceived here, almost by instinct, the peril of too great a reticence. Since they profess to labor on behalf of the Marquis John Giacomo, it is natural they should name him, but I have never heard it asserted that he has knowledge of their plot. Nor any other? The Marquis was singularly insistent. Nor any other? He repeated. Bellarion showed a blank face. Why? What other? Nay, sir, I am asking you. No, Highness, he slowly answered. I recall the mention of no other. The prince sank back into his chair, his searching eyes never quitting the young man's face. Then he committed what in a man so subtle was a monstrous indiscretion, giving Bellarion the explanation that he lacked. You are not deep enough in their confidence yet. Return to their counsels, and keep me informed of all that transpires in them. Be diligent, and you shall find me generous. Bellarion was genuinely aghast. Your Highness will delay to strike, when by delay you may imperil? He was sternly silenced. Is your counsel sought? You understand what I require of you. You have leave to go. But, Highness, to return amongst them now, after openly coming here to you, will not be without its danger. The regent did not share his alarm. He smiled again. You have chosen a path of peril, as I told you, but I will help you. I discover that I have letters from Facino humbly soliciting my protection for his adoptive son whilst in Casale. It is a petition I cannot disregard. Facino is a great lord in Milan these days. My court shall be advised of it, and it will not be considered strange that I make you free of the palace. You will persuade your confederates that you avail yourself of my hospitality, so that you may abuse it in their interests that should satisfy them, and I shall look to see you here this evening. Now go with God." Bellarion stumbled out distracted. Nothing had gone as he intended after that too promising beginning. Perhaps had he not disclosed himself as Facino Cane's adoptive son, he would not have supplied the regent with a pretense that should render plausible his comings and goings. But the necessity for that disclosure was undeniable. His conduct had been dictated by the conviction that he could do for the Lady Valeria what she could not without self-betrayal do for herself. Confidently, he had counted upon instant action of the regent to crush the conspirators, and so make the princess safe from a net in which their crazy ambitions would entangle her. Instead, he had made the discovery, from the single indiscretion of the regent, that the Marquis Theodore was already fully aware of the existence of conspiracy and of the identity of some, if not all, of the chief conspirators. That was why he had so readily accepted Bellarion's tale. The disclosure agreed so completely with the regent's knowledge that he had no cause to doubt Bellarion's veracity, and finding him true in these most intimate details, he readily believed true the rest of his story and the specious account of his own intervention in the affair. Possibly Bellarion's name was already known to him as that of one of the plotters who met at Barbaresco's house. Far, then, from achieving his real purpose, all that Bellarion had accomplished was to offer himself as another and apparently singularly apt instrument for the regent's dark purposes. It was a perturbed Bellarion, a Bellarion who perceived in what dangerous waters he was swimming, who came back that noontide to Barbaresco's house. Chapter 10 The Warning. They were very gay that night at the hospitable court of the Marquis Theodore. A comedy was performed early in the evening, a comedy which Fra Serafino in his chronicle describes as lascivious, by which he may mean no more than playful. Thereafter there was some dancing in the long hall, of which the regent himself set the example, leading forth the ugly but graceful young Princess of Moria. His nephew, the Marquis John Giacomo, followed the Countess of Ronsecco, who had declined the honor she had dared, for the boy's cheeks were flushed, his eyes glazed, his step uncertain, and his speech noisy and incoherent, and there were few who smiled as they observed the drunken antics of their future prince. Once, indeed, the regent paused, grave and concerned of countenance, to whisper an admonition. The boy answered him with a bray of insolent laughter, and flung away, dragging the pretty countess with him. It was plain to all that the gentle, knightly regent found it beyond his power to control his unruly, degenerate nephew. Amongst the few who dared to smile was Messer Castruccio de Fenestrella, radiant in a suit of cloth of gold, who stood watching the mischief he had made. For it was he who had first secretly challenged John Giacomo to a drinking bout during supper, and afterwards urged him to dance with the pretty wife of stiff-necked Ronsecco. A while he stood looking on. Then, wearying of the entertainment, he sauntered off to join a group apart of which the Lady Valeria was the center. Her ladies, Dionera and Isata, were with her, the pedant Corsario, looking even less pedantic than his habit, and a half-dozen gallants who among them made all the chatter. Her Highness was pale, and there was a frown between her eyes that so wistfully followed her unseemly brother, inattentive of those about her, some of whom from the kindliest motives sought to distract her attention. Her cheeks warmed a little at the approach of Castruccio, who moved into the group with easy, insolent grace. "My lord is gay tonight," he informed them lightly. None answered him. He looked at them with his flickering, shifty eyes, a sneering smile on his lips. "So are not you," he informed them. "You need enlivening." He thrust forward the princess and bowed. "Will your Highness dance?" She did not look at him. Her eyes were fixed, and their glance went beyond him, and was of such intensity that Messer Castruccio turned to seek the object of that curious contemplation. Down the hall came striding Messer Aliprandi, the orator of Milan, and with him a tall, black-haired young man, in a suit of red that was more conspicuous than suitable of fashion to the place or the occasion. Into the group about the princess they came, whilst the exquisite Castruccio eyed this unfashionable young man with frank contempt, bearing his pomander ball to his nostrils, as if to protect his olfactory organs from possible offense. Messer Aliprandi, trimly bearded, elegant in his furred gown, and suavely mannered, bowed low before the Lady Valeria. "Permit me, Highness, to present Messer Bellarion Kane, the son of my good friend Facino Kane of Biandre." It was the Marquis Theodore, who had requested the Order of Milan, as was proper, seeing that by reason of his paternity Bellarion was to be regarded as Milanese, to present his assumed compatriot to her Highness. Bellarion, modeling himself upon Aliprandi, executed his bow with grace. As Fra Serafino truthfully says of him, he learnt manners and customs and all things so quickly that he might aptly be termed a fluid in the jug of any circumstance. The Lady Valeria inclined her head with no more trace of recognition in her face than there was in Bellarion's own. "You are welcome, sir," she said with formal graciousness, and then turned to Aliprandi. "I did not know that the Count of Biandre had a son, nor did I, Madonna, until this moment. It was the Marquis Theodore who made him known to me." She fancied in Aliprandi's tone something that seemed to disclaim responsibility, but she turned affably to the newcomer, and Bellarion marveled at the ease with which she dissembled. "I knew the Count of Biandre well when I was a child, and I hold his memory very dear. He was in my father's service once, as you will know. I rejoice in the greatness he has since achieved. It should make a brave tale." "Per aspera ad astra is ever a brave tale," Bellarion answered soberly. "Too often it is per astra ad aspera, if I may judge by what I have read. You shall tell me of your father, sir. I have often wished to hear the story of his advancement to command, Highness." He bowed again. The others drew closer, expecting entertainment. But Bellarion, who had no such entertainment to bestow, nor knew of Facino's life more than a fragment of what was known to all the world, extricated himself as adroitly as he could. "I am no practiced troubadour or story singer, and this tale of a journey to the stars should be told under the stars." "Why, so it shall, then. They shine brightly enough. You shall show me Facino's, and perhaps your own." She rose and commanded her ladies to attend her. Castruccio fetched a sigh of relief. "Give thanks," he said audibly to those about him, "for heaven's mercy which has spared you this weariness." The door at the end of the hall stood open to the terrace and the moonlight. Thither the princess conducted Bellarion, her ladies in close attendance. Approaching the threshold, they came upon the Marquis John Giacomo, reeling clumsily beside the Countess of Ronsecco, who was almost on the point of tears. He paused in his caperings that he might ogle his sister. "Where do you go, Valeria? And who's this Longshanks?" She approached him. "You are tired. Giannino, and the Countess, too, is tired. You would be better resting a while." "Indeed, Highness," cried the young Countess, eagerly thankful. But the Marquis was not at all of his sister's wise opinion. "Tired? Resting? You're childish, Valeria. Always childish. Childish and meddlesome. Poking your long nose into everything. Some day you'll poke it into something that'll sting it. And what will it look like when it's stung? Have you thought of that?" He laughed derisively and caught the Countess by the arm. "Let's leave Long Nose and Longshanks." "Ha! Ha!" His idiotic laughter shrilled up. He was ravished by his own humor. He let his voice ring out that all might hear and share the enjoyment of his comical conceit. "Long Nose and Longshanks. Long Nose and Longshanks." Screaming with laughter, he plunged forward to resume the dance, trod upon one of his trailing, exaggerated sleeves, tripped himself, and went sprawling on the tessellated floor, his laughter louder and more idiotic than ever. A dozen ran to lift him. The princess tapped Bellarion sharply on the arm with her fan of ostrich plumes. Her face was like graven stone. "Come," she commanded, and passed out ahead of him. On the terrace, she signed to her ladies to fall behind, whilst with her companion. She moved beyond earshot along the marble balustrade, whose moonlit pallor was here and there splashed by the black tide of trailing plants. "Now, sir," she invited in a voice of ice, "will you explain this new identity in your presence here?" He answered in calm, level tones. My presence explains itself when I tell you that my identity is accepted by His Highness the Regent. The son of Facino Kane is not to be denied the hospitality of the court of Montferrat. Then why did you lie to me when... No, this is the lie. This false identity was as necessary to gain admission here, as was the painter's smock I wore yesterday. Another lie. You asked me to believe that you... Indignation choked her. My senses tell me what you are, an agent sent to work my ruin. Your senses tell you either more or less, or else you would not now be here. And then it was as if the bonds of her self-control were suddenly snapped by the strain they sought to bear. Oh, God, she cried out. I am near distraction. My brother... She broke off on something akin to a sob. Outwardly Bellarion, remain calm. Shall we take one thing at a time? Else we shall never be done. And I should not remain here too long with you. Why not? You have the sanction of my dear uncle who sends you. Even so... He lowered his voice to a whisper. It is your uncle is my dupe, not you. That is what I expected you to say. You had best leave inference until you have heard me out. Inference, Highness, as I have shown you once already, is not your strength. If she resented his words and the tone he took, she gave no expression to it. Standing rigidly against the marble balustrade, she looked away from him and down that moonlit garden with its inky shadows and tall yew hedges that were sharp black silhouettes against a faintly irradiated sky. Briefly, swiftly, lucidly, Bellarion told her how her message had been received by the conspirators. You thought to checkmate them, but they perceived the move you have overlooked, whereby they checkmate you. This proves what already I have told you, that they serve none but themselves. You and your brother are but the instruments with which they go to work. There was only one way to frustrate them, one only way to serve and save you. That way I saw it. She interrupted him there. You saw it? You saw it. Her voice held bewilderment, unbelief, and even some anger. Why should you desire to save or serve me? If I could believe you, I must account you impertinent. You were a messenger, no more. Was I no more when I disclosed to you the true aims of these men and the perils of your association with them? You were more, she said bitterly. But what were you? Your servant, Madonna, he answered simply. Yes, I had forgotten. My servant, sent by Providence, was it not? You are bitter, lady, said Bellarion. Am I? She turned at last to look at him, but his face was no more than a faint white blur. Perhaps I find you too sweet to be real. He sighed. The rest of my tale will hardly change that opinion. Is it worth while continuing? He spoke without any heat, a little wistfully. It should be entertaining, if not convincing. For your entertainment, then, what you could not do without destroying yourself was easily possible to me. And he told her to pretend to petition, giving the regent the names of those who plotted against his life. He saw her clutch her breast, caught the gasp of dread and dismay that broke from her lips. You betrayed them. Was it not what you announced that you would do if they did not abandon their plan of murder? I was your deputy, no more. When I presented myself as Facino Kane's adopted son, I was readily believed. Because the regent cared little whether it were true or not, since in me he perceived the very agent that he needed. Now at last we have something that does not strain belief. Will it strain belief that the regent was already fully informed of this conspiracy? What? Why else should he have trusted or believed me? Of his own knowledge, he knew that what I told him was true. He knew and he held his hand? Again the question was made scornful by unbelief, because he lacked evidence that you, and through you, your brother, were parties to the plot. What to him are Barbaresco's shabby crew? It is the Marquis John Giacomo who must be removed in such a manner as not to impair the Lord Regent's credit. To gather evidence am I now sent. She tore an ostrich plume from her fan in her momentary passion. You do not hesitate to confess how you betray each in turn. Barbaresco to the Regent to me, and now, no doubt, me to the Regent. As for the last, Madonna, to betray you I need not now be here. I could have supplied the Regent with all the evidence he needs against you at the same time that I supplied the evidence against the others. She was silent, turning it over in her mind, and because her mind was acute, She saw the proof his words afforded, but because afraid, she mistrusted proof. It may be part of the trap, she complained. If it were not, why should you remain after denouncing my friends? The aims you pretend would have been fully served by that. His answer was prompt and complete. If I had departed, you would never have known the ants of those men whom you trust, nor would you have known that there's a Judas amongst them already. It was necessary to warn you. Yes, she said slowly. I see, I think. And then in sudden revolt against the conviction he was forcing upon her, and in tones which if low were vehement to the point of fierceness. Necessary, she cried, echoing the word he had used. Necessary? How was it necessary? Whence this necessity of yours? A week ago you did not know me. Yet for me, who am nothing to you, whose service carries no reward, you pretend yourself prepared to labor and to take risks involving even your very life. That is what you asked me to believe. You suppose me mad, I think. As she faced him now, she fancied that a smile broke upon that face so indistinctly seen. His voice, as he answered her, was very soft. It is not mad to believe in madness. Madness exists, Madonna. Set me down as suffering from it. The air of the world is proving too strong and heady, perhaps for one bred in cloisters. It has intoxicated me, I think. She laughed chillingly. For once you offer an explanation, that goes a little lame. Your invention is failing, sir. Nay, lady, my understanding, he answered sadly. She set a hand upon his arm. He felt it quivering there, which surprised him almost as much as a change in her voice, now suddenly halting and unsteady. Messer Bellarion, if my suspicions wound you, set them down to my distraction. It is so easy, so dangerously easy, to believe what we desire to believe. I know, he said gently, yet when you've slept on what I've said, you'll find that your safety lies in trusting me. Safety? Am I concerned with safety only? Tonight you saw my brother. I saw, if that is Messer Castruccio's work. Castruccio is but a tool. Come, sir, we talk in vain. She began to move along the terrace towards her waiting ladies. Suddenly she paused. I must trust you, Sir Bellarion. I must, or I shall go mad in this ugly tangle. I'll take the risk. If you are not true, if you win my trust only to abuse it and work the evil will of the regent, then God will surely punish you. I think so, too, he breathed. Tell me now, she questioned. What shall you say to my uncle? Why, that I have talked with you fruitlessly, that either you have no knowledge of Barbaresco, or else you withheld it from me. Shall you come again? If you desire it. The way is open now. But what remains to do? You may discover that. Thus she conveyed that, having resolved to give him her trust, she gave it without stint. They came back into the hall, where stiff and formally Bellarion made his valedictory bow, then went to take his leave of the regent. The regent disengaged himself from the group of which he was the center, and, taking Bellarion by the arm, drew him apart a little. I have made a sounding, Bellarion informed him. Either she mistrusts me, or else she knows nothing of Barbaresco. Be sure of the former, sir, said the regent softly. Procure credentials from Barbaresco, and try again. It should be easy, so... Chapter 11, Under Suspicion. At Barbaresco's a surprise awaited Messer Bellarion. The whole company of plotters swarmed about him as he entered the long, dusty room of the mezzanine, and he found himself gripped at once between the fierce Casella and the reckless Spigno. He did not like their looks, nor those of any man present. Least of all did he like the looks of Barbaresco, who confronted him, oily and falsely suave of manner. Where have you been, Master Bellarion? He realized that he had need of his wits. He looked round with surprise and contempt in his stare. Oh, yes, you're conspirators to the life, he told them. You see a spy in every neighbor, a betrayal in every act. Oh, you have eyes, but know what to inform your vision. God help those who trust you. God help you all. He wrenched at the arms that held him. Let me go, fools. Barbaresco licked his lips. His right hand was held behind his back. Stealthily, almost he came a step nearer, so that he was very close. Not until you tell us where you have been. Not then, unless you tell us more. Bellarion's sneer became more marked, but no fear showed in his glance. Where I have been, you know, hence these tragical airs. I've been to court. To what end, Bellarion? Barbaresco softly questioned. The others preserved a frozen, watchful silence. To betray you, of course. He was boldly ironical. Having done so, I return so that you may slit my throat. Spigno laughed and released the arm he held. I for one am answered. I told you from the first I did not believe it. Casella, however, hung on fiercely. I'll need a clear answer before I— Give me air, man, cried Bellarion impatiently, and wrenched his arm free. No need to maul me. I'll not run. There are 7 of you to prevent me, and reflection may cool your humors. Reflect, for instance, that if I were for running, I should not have come back. You tell us what you would not or did not do. We asked you what you did, Barbaresco insisted. I'll tell you yet another thing I would not have done if my aim had been betrayal. I should not have gone openly to court so that you might hear my presence there. The very argument I employed, Spigno reminded them, with something of Bellarion's own scorn in his manner now. Let the boy tell his tale. They muttered among themselves. Bellarion crossed the room under their black looks, moving with the fearless air of a man strong in the sense of his own integrity. He slid into a chair. There is nothing to tell that is not self-evident already. I went to carry your message to the Princess Valeria, to point out to her the position of checkmate in which you hold her, to make her realize that being committed to this enterprise, she cannot now either draw back or dictate to us the means by which our aims are to be reached. All this, I rejoice to tell you, I have happily accomplished. Again, it was Barbaresco who was their spokesman. All this we may believe when you tell us why you chose to go to court to do it, and how, being what you represent yourself to be, you succeeded in gaining admission. God, give me patience with you, dear St. Thomas, said Bellarion, sighing. I went to court because the argument I foresaw with the princess was hardly one to be conducted furtively behind a hedge. It threatened to be protracted. Besides, for furtive dealing, sirs, bold and open approaches are best when they are possible. They were possible to me. It happened, sirs, that I am indeed the adoptive son of Facino Cain, and I perceive how I might use that identity to present myself at court and there move freely. A dozen questions rained upon him. He answered them all in a phrase. The ambassador of Milan, Messer Aliprandi, was there to sponsor me. There was a silence, broken at last by Barbaresco. Aliprandi may have been your sponsor there. He cannot be your sponsor here, and you know it. I, growled white-haired Lungo, an impudent tale, and a lame one, added Casella. If you had this means of going to court, why did you wait so long to seize it? Other ways were open on former occasions. You forget that Madonna Valeria was not expecting me. The garden gate would not be ajar, and I could not this time go as a painter, which was a disguise I adopted on the last occasion. Besides, it is too expensive. It cost me 5 ducats. Again their questions came together, for it was the first they had heard of the disguise which he had used. He told them at last the story, and he saw that it pleased them. Why did you not tell us this before? Quoth one. Bellarion shrugged. Is it important? So that I was your Mercury. Did it matter in what shape I went? Why should I trouble you with trivial things? Besides, let me remind you, since you can't perceive it for yourselves, that if I had betrayed you to the Marquis Theodore, the captain of justice would now be here in my place. That, at least, is not to be denied, said Spigno, and in his vehemence carried 2 or 3 others with him. But the fierce Casella was not of those, nor Lungo, nor Barbaresco, the latter least of all, for a sudden memory had stirred in him. His blue eyes narrowed until they were almost hidden in his great red cheeks. How does it happen that none at court recognize in you the Pallas Amanuensis? Bellarion perceived his danger, and learnt the lesson that a lie may become a clumsy obstacle to trip a man. But the apprehension he suddenly felt, no trace revealed itself upon his countenance. It is possible some did. What then? Neither identity contradicts the other. And remember, pray, that Messer Aliprandi was there to avouch me. But he cannot avouch you here, Barbaresco said again, and sternly asked, Who can? Bellarion looked at him, and from him to the others who seemed to await almost in breathlessness his answer. Do you demand of me proof that I am the adoptive son of Facino Cain? He asked. So much do we demand it that unless you can afford it, your sands are run. My cockerel, Casella answered him, his fingers on his dagger as he spoke. It was a case for bold measures if he would gain time. Given this, he knew that all things may become possible, and there was one particular thing his shrewd calculations accounted probable here, if only he could induce them to postpone until the morrow the slitting of his throat. So be it. From here to Sigliano, it is no more than a day's ride on a good horse. Let one of you go ask the abbot of the Grazie, the name of Infacino, left in the convent's care. A name? Cried Casella, sneering. Is that all the proof? All if the man who goes is a fool. If not, he may obtain from the abbot a minute description of this Bellarion. If more is needed, I'll give you a note of the clothes I wore and the gear and money with which I left the Grazie, that you may obtain confirmation of that, too. But Barbaresco was impatient. Even so, what shall all this prove? It cannot prove you true. It cannot prove that you are not a spy sent hither to betray and sell us. No, Bellarion agreed, but it will prove that the identity on which I won the court is what I represented, and that will be something as a beginning. The rest, if there is more, can surely wait. And meanwhile, Casella was beginning. Meanwhile, I am in your hands. You're never so bloodthirsty that you cannot postpone murdering me until you verified my tale. That was what they fell to discussing among themselves there in his very presence, affording him all the excitement of watching the ball of his fate toss his way, and that among the disputants. In the end, the game might have gone against him, but for Count Spigno, who labored Bellarion's own argument that if he betrayed them, he would never have incurred the risk of returning amongst them. In the end, they deprived Bellarion of the dagger, which was his only weapon, and then Barbaresco, Casella, and Spigno jointly conducted him above stairs to a shabby chamber under the roof. It had no windows, whence an evasion might be attempted, and was lighted by a glazed oblong some 10 feet overhead at the highest part of the sharply sloping ceiling. It contained no furniture, nor indeed anything beyond some straw, and sacking in a corner, which he was bidden to regard as his bed for that night, and probably for the next. They pinioned his wrist behind him for greater safety, and Casella bade him be thankful that the cord was not being tightened about his neck instead. Upon that they went out, taking the light with them, locking the door, and leaving him a prisoner in the dark. He stood listening to their footsteps receding down the stairs. Then he looked up at the oblong of moonlight in the ceiling. If the glass were removed, there would be room for a man to pass through and gain the roof. But considering the slope of it, the passage might as easily lead to a broken neck as to liberty, and in any case he had neither the power nor the means to reach it. He squatted upon the meager bedding, with his chin almost upon his knees, in an attitude of extreme discomfort, making something in the nature of an assessment of his mental and emotional equipment. Seen now from the point of view of cold reason to which danger had sharply brought him, his career since leaving the peace of the Grazie a week ago seemed fantastic and incredible. Destiny had made sport with him. Sentimentality had led him by the nose. He had mixed himself in the affairs of a state through which he was no more than a wayfarer, because moved to interest in the fortunes of a young woman of exalted station who would probably dismiss his memory with a sigh, when she came to learn how his throat had been cut by the self-seeking fools with whom so recklessly she had associated herself. It was, he supposed, a manifestation of that romantic and unreasonable phenomenon known as chivalry. If he extricated himself alive from this predicament, he would see to it that whatever follies he committed in the future, chivalry would certainly not be found amongst them. Experience had cured him of any leanings in that direction. It had also inspired doubts of the infallibility of his syllogism on the subject of evil. He suspected a flaw in it somewhere, for evil most certainly existed. His respect for the value of experience was rapidly increasing. He shifted his position, stretched himself out, and lay on his side, contemplating the patch of moonlight on the floor and speculating upon his chances of winning out of this death trap. Of these, he took an optimistic view. The assistance upon which Bellarion chiefly counted was that of the traitor amongst the conspirators, whom he strove vainly to identify in the light of their behavior that evening. Spigno had been the only one who, by advocating Bellarion's cause, had procured him this respite. Yet Spigno was one of the first to spring upon him dagger in hand, on his return from court. But the traitor, whoever he might be, would probably report the event to the Marquis Theodore, and the Marquis should take steps directly or indirectly to procure the release of one whom he must now regard as a valuable agent. That thought Bellarion was a probability. Meanwhile, he would remember that probabilities are by no means certainties, and he would be watchful for an opportunity to help himself. On these reflections, he must have fallen asleep, and he must have slept for some time, for when suddenly he awakened, the patch of moonlight was gone from the floor. That was his first conscious observation. His second was that something was stirring near at hand. He raised himself on his elbow, an operation by no means easy with pinioned wrists, and turned his head in the direction of the sound, to perceive a faint but increasing realm of light from the direction of the doorway, and understand with the next heartbeat that the door was being slowly and stealthily pushed open. That was, he afterwards confessed, his first real acquaintance with the emotion of fear, fear that roughened his skin and chilled his spine, fear inspired by the instantaneous conviction that here came someone to murder him as he lay there bound and helpless. The suspense was but a second's, yet in those seconds Bellarion seemed to live an age as he watched that slowly widening gap and the faint light, which increased in area but hardly in illumination. Then the shadowy form of man slipped through, darkly discernible in the faint glow from the veiled light he carried. Very softly came his voice. "Esse, quiet, make no sound." The note of warning partially calmed the tumult of Bellarion's heart, which was thudding in his throat as if to suffocate him. As quietly as it had been opened, the door was closed again. A thin and partially translucent mantle was pulled from the lantern it had been muffling, and the light beating through the horn panes was reflected from the floor and walls upon the lean, aquiline features of Count Spigno. Bellarion uttered something that sounded like a chuckle. "I was expecting you," said he. Chapter 12, Count Spigno. Spigno set the lantern on the floor and came forward. "No need to talk," he muttered. "Roll over so that I can free your hands." He drew his dagger and with it cut Bellarion's bonds. "Take off your shoes." "Make haste." Bellarion squatted upon his bedding, and with blundering fingers, still numb from the thong, he removed his footgear. His wits worked briskly, and it was not at all upon the subject of his escape that they were busy. Despite his late resolves, and although still far from being out of peril, with the chance of salvation no more than in sight, he was already at his knight-errantry again. He stood up at last, and Spigno was whispering urgently, "Wait, we must not go together. Give me 5 minutes to win clear, then follow." Bellarion considered him, and his eyes were very grave. "But when my evasion is discovered," he was beginning. Spigno impatiently broke in, explaining hurriedly, "I am the last they will suspect. The others are all here tonight. But I pleaded urgent reasons why I could not remain. I made a pretense of departing. Then below until all were asleep. They will be at each other's throats in the morning over this." He smiled darkly in satisfaction of his cunning. "I'll take the light. You know your way about this house better than I do. Tread softly when you come." He was turned to take up the lantern when Bellarion arrested him. "You'll wait for me outside?" "To what end?" "Nay, now. There is no purpose in that. Let me come with you. Then, if I should stumble in the dark, they'll be upon me. Take care that you do not. At least leave me your dagger since you take the light. Here, then." Spigno unsheathed and surrendered the weapon to him. Bellarion gripped the hilt. With very somber eyes, he considered the Count. Then the latter turned aside again for the lantern. "A moment," said Bellarion. "What now?" Impatiently, Spigno faced once more the queer glance of those dark eyes, and in that moment Bellarion stabbed him. It was a swift, hard-driven, merciful stroke that found the unfortunate man's heart and quenched his life before he had time to realize that it was threatened. Without a sound, he reeled back under the blow. Bellarion's left arm went round his shoulders to ease him to the ground, but Spigno's limbs sagged under him. He sank through Bellarion's embrace like an empty sack, and then rolled over sideways. The murderer choked back a sob. His legs were trembling like empty hose with which the wind makes sport. His face was leaden-hued and his sight was blurred by tears. He went down on his knees beside the dead Count, turned him on his back, straightened out the twitching limbs, and folded the arms across the breast. Nor did he rise when this was done. In slaying Count Spigno, he had performed a necessary act, necessary in the service to which he had dedicated himself. Thus, at a blow, he had shattered the instrument upon which the Marquis Theodore was depending to encompass his nephew's ruin, and the discovery tomorrow of Spigno's death and Bellarion's own evasion in circumstances of unfathomable mystery, must strike such terror into the hearts of conspirators that there would probably be an end to the plotting which served no purpose but to advance the regent's schemes. Yet, despite these heartening reflections, Bellarion could not shake off his horror. He had done murder, and he had done it in cold blood, deliberate and calculatingly. Worse than all, his convent rearing asserting itself here. He had sent a man unshriven to confront his maker. He hoped that the unexpectedness with which Spigno's doom had overtaken him would be weighed in the balance against the sins which death had surprised upon him. That is why he remained on his knees and with joined hands prayed fervently and passionately for the repose of the soul which he had dispatched to judgment. So intent was he that he took no heed of the precious time that was meanwhile speeding. For perhaps a quarter of an hour he continued there in prayer. Then crossing himself, he rose at last and gave thought to his own escape. Thrusting his shoes into his belt and muffling the lantern as Spigno had muffled it, he set out, the naked dagger in his right hand. A stair creaked under his step, and then another, and each time he checked and caught his breath, listening intently. Once he fancied that he heard a movement below, and the sound so alarmed him that it was some moments before he could proceed. He gained the floor below in safety, and rounding the balusters continued his cautious descent towards the mezzanine, where, as he knew, Barbaresco slept. Midway down, he heard that sound again, this time unmistakably the sound of someone moving in the passage to the right, in the direction of Barbaresco's room. He stopped abruptly and thrust a muffled lantern behind him, so that the faint glow of it might not beat downwards upon the gloom to betray him. He was conscious of pulses drumming in his temples, for shaken by the night's events, he was now become an easy prey to fear. Suddenly, to his increasing horror, another, stronger light fell along the passage. It grew steadily as he watched it, and with it came a sound of softly shod feet, a mutter in a voice that he knew for Barbaresco's, and an answering mutter in the high-pitched voice of Barbaresco's old servant. His first impulse was to turn and flee upwards, back the way he had come. But thus he would be rushing into a trap, which would be closed by Barbaresco's guests, who slept most probably above. Then, bracing himself for whatever fate might send, he bounded boldly and swiftly forward, no longer troubling to tread lightly. His aim was to round the stairs, and thereafter trust to speed to complete the descent and gain the street. But the noise he made brought Barbaresco hurrying forward, and at the foot of that flight they confronted each other, Bellarion's way barred by the gentleman of Casale, who loosed at sight of him a roar that roused the house. Barbaresco was in bedgown and slippers, a candle in one hand, his servant following at his heels. He was unarmed, but not on that account could he shirk the necessity of tackling and holding this fugitive, whose flight itself was an abundant advertisement of his treachery, and whose evasion now might be attended by direst results. He passed the candle to his servant, and flung himself bodily upon Bellarion, pinning the young man's arms to his sides, and roaring lustily the while. Bellarion struggled silently and grimly in that embrace which was like the hug of a bear, for despite his corpulence Barbaresco was as strong as he was heavy. But the grip he had taken, whilst having the advantage of pinning down the hand that held the dagger, was one that it is impossible long to maintain upon an opponent of any vigor, and before he could sufficiently bend him to receive his weight, Bellarion had broken loose. Old Andrea, the servant, having set the candle upon the floor, was running in now to seize Bellarion's legs. He knocked Andrea over, winded by a well-directed kick in the stomach, then swung aloft his dagger as Barbaresco rushed at him again. It was in his mind, as he afterwards declared, that he did not desire another murder on his soul that night. But if another murder there must be, he preferred that it should not be his own. So he struck without pity. Barbaresco swerved, throwing up his right arm to parry the blow, and received a long blade to the hilt in his fleshy forearm. He fell back, clapping his hand to the bubbling wound, and roaring like a bull in pain, just as Casella, almost naked, but sword in hand, came bounding down the stairs with Lungo and yet another following. For a second it seemed to Bellarion that he had struck too late. If he attempted now to regain the staircase, he must inevitably be cut off, and how could he hope with a dagger to meet Casella's sword? Then, on a new thought, he darted forward and plunged into the long room of that mezzanine. He slammed the door and shot home the bolts, before Casella and Lungo brought up against it on the other side. He uncovered at last his lantern and set it down. He dragged a heavy table across the door, so as to reinforce it against their straining shoulders. Then, snatching up the cloak in which the lantern had been muffled, he made for the window and threw it open. He paused to put on his shoes, what time the baffled conspirators were battering and straining at the door. Then he forced the naked dagger as far as it would go into the empty sheath that dangled from his own belt, and tied a corner of the cloak securely to one of the stone mullions, so that some 5 or 6 feet of it dangled below the sill. Onto this sill he climbed, turned, knelt, and laid hold of the cloak with both hands. He had but to let himself down hand over hand for the length of cloth, and then only an easy drop a few feet would lie between himself and safety. But even as he addressed himself to this, the house door below was open with clatter, and out into the street sprang 2 of the conspirators. He groaned as he looked down upon them from his precarious position, whilst they, in their shirts, capering fantastically as it seemed to him in the shaft of light that cut athwart the gloom from the open door, brandished their glittering blades and waited. Since there could be no salvation in climbing back, he realized that he was at the end of the wild career he had run since leaving the Piece of the Grazie a week ago. A week! He had lived a lifetime in that week, and he had looked more than once in the face of death. He thought of the abbot's valedictory words, Pax multa in cella, foris autumn plurima bella. What would he not give now to be back in the peace of that convent cell? As he hung there between 2 deaths, he sought to compose his mind to prayer, to prepare his soul for judgment, by an act of contrition for his sins. Nor could he in that supreme hour take comfort in his old heresy that sin is a human fiction. And then, even as his despair of body and spirit touched his nadir, he caught a sound that instantly heartened him, the approach of regularly tramping feet. Those below heard it, too. The watch was on its rounds. The murderous twain took counsel for a moment. Then, fearing to be surprised there, they darted through the doorway and closed the door again, just as a patrol with lanterns swinging from their halberds came round the corner not a dozen yards away. With nothing to fear from these, Bellarion now let himself swiftly down the length of the cloak and dropped lightly to the ground. He was breathing easily and oddly disposed to laugh when the officer came up with him, and a patrol of 6 made a half-circle round him. "What's this?" he was challenged. "Why do you prefer a window to a door, my friend?" Bellarion was still seeking a plausible answer when the officer's face came nearer to his own, upon which the light was beating down. Recognition was mutual. It was that same officer who had hunted him from the Tavern of the Stag to the Palace Gardens. "By the blood!" cried Messer Bernabo. "It is Lorenzacio's fleet young friend. Well met, my cockerel. I've been seeking you this week. You shall tell me where you've been hiding." Chapter 13, The Trial. The court of Podesta Casale was commonly well attended, and often some of the attendants would be distinguished. The Princess Valeria, for instance, would sometimes sit with the ladies in the little minstrel's gallery of what had once been the banqueting hall of the communal palace, and by her presence attest her interest in all that concerned the welfare of the people of Montferrat. Occasionally, too, as became a prince who desired to be regarded as a father of his people, the Marquis Theodore would come to observe for himself how justice was administered in his name, or in the name of the boy whose deputy he was. On the morning after that affray at Messer Barbaresco's house, both the regent and his niece would be seen in that hall of justice, the latter aloft in the gallery, the former in a chair placed on the dais alongside of the Podesta seat of state. The regent's countenance was grave, his brow thoughtful. This was proper to the occasion, but hardly due to the causes supposed by the spectators. Disclosures now inevitable might win him an increase of the public sympathy he enjoyed, but because premature they temporarily wrecked his real aims, wrecked in any case by the death of his agent Spigno. There were other notabilities present. Messer Aliprandi, who had expressly postponed his departure from Milan, was seated beside the regent. Behind them against a gray stone wall lounged a glittering group of courtiers, in which Castruccio de Fenestrello was conspicuous. In the body of the court seated a crowd composed of citizens of almost every degree, rigidly kept clear of the wide space before the dais by a dozen men-at-arms, forming a square with partisans held horizontally. On the left of the Podesta, who was clothed in a scarlet robe and wore a flat round scarlet cap that was edged with miniver, sat his 2 assessors in black, and below these 2 scriveners. The Podesta himself, Angelo de Ferraris, a handsome, bearded man of 50, was a Genoese. To comply with the universal rule throughout Italy that the high office of justiciary should ever be held by one who was a foreigner to the state, so as to ensure the disinterestedness and purity of the justice he dispensed. Some minor cases had briefly been heard and judged, and the court now awaited the introduction of that prisoner who was responsible for this concourse above the average in numbers and quality. He came in at last, between guards, tall, comely, with thick, glossy black hair that fell to the nape of his neck, his brave red suit considerably disordered and the worse for wear. He was pale from lack of sleep, for he had spent what was left of the night in the town jail among the vermin-infested scourings of Casale, where he had deemed it prudent to maintain himself awake. Perhaps because of this, too, he suffered a moment's loss of his admirable self-command, when upon first entering there, he found himself scanned by eyes so numerous and so varied. For an instant he paused disconcerted, experiencing something of that shyness which is a mixture of mistrust and resentment peculiar to wild creatures. But the emotion was transient. Before it could be remarked, he had recovered his normal poise and advanced to the place assigned him on the broad stone flags, bowed to the regent and podesta, then waited, his head high, his glance steady. On the hush that fell came the podesta's voice, sternly calm. Your name? Bellarion Kane. Since that was the name he had given himself when he had sought the regent, the lie must be maintained. It was dangerous, of course, but dangers hemmed him in on every side. Your father's name? Facino Kane is my adoptive father's name. The name of my carnal parents I do not know. Desired to explain himself, he did so, and his explanation was a model of brevity and lucidity. It bore witness to a calm which argued to his listeners an easy conscience. But the podesta was to deal with certain facts rather than uncertain personal impressions. You came hither a week ago in the company of one Lorenzaccio de Trino, a bandit with a price on his head. To this one of my officers, who is present bears witness. Do you deny it? I do not. It is possible for an honest man to travel in the company of a rogue. You were with him at a house in the district of Casale where a theft was committed, and the owner of which was subsequently murdered here in the hostelry of the Stag by the same Lorenzaccio, whilst in your company. The murdered man recognized you before he died. Do you confess to this? Confession implies sin and the seeking of forgiveness. I admit the facts freely. They nowise contradict my previous statement. But that is not a confession. Yet if you were innocent of evil, why did you run away from my officer? Why did you not remain and state then what you have stated now? Because the appearances were against me. I acted upon impulse, and foolishly as men act when they do not pause first to reflect. You found shelter in the house of the Lord Annibale Barbaresco. No doubt you told him your story, represented yourself as an innocent man betrayed by appearances, and so moved his compassion. The podesta paused. Bellarion did not answer. He let the statement pass. He knew the source of it. Last night, when the officer had roused the house and announced to Barbaresco his prisoner's supposed association with Lorenzaccio, Barbaresco had fastened upon it to explain the events. Last night you attempted to rob him, and being caught in the act by Count Spigno, you slew the Count and afterwards wounded the Lord Barbaresco himself. You were in the act of escaping from the house by one of its windows when the watch supervened and caught you. Do you admit all this? I do not, nor will the circumstances. I am a robber, it is said. I spend a week in Messer Barbaresco's house. On any night of that week I was alone with him, save only for his decrepit old servant. Yet it is pretended that I chose as the occasion for robbing him a night on which 7 able-bodied friends are with him. Your potency must see that the facts are mocked by likelihood. His potency saw this, as did all present. They saw more. This young man's speech and manner were those of the scholar. He proclaimed himself, rather than of the robber, he was represented. The justiciary leaned forward, combing his short, pointed beard. What, then, do you say took place? Let us hear you. Is it not within the forms of law that we should first hear my accuser, this Messer Barbaresco? Bellarion's bold dark eyes raked the court, seeking the stout person of his late host. The podesta smiled a little, and his smile was not quite nice. Ah, you know the law? Trust a rogue to know the law. Which is to make a rogue of every lawyer in the land, said Bellarion, and was rewarded by a titter from the crowd, pleased with a sarcasm that contained more truth than he suspected. I know the law as I know divinity and rhetoric and other things, because I have studied it. Maybe, said the podesta grimly, but not as closely as you are to study it now. Messer de Ferraris, too, could deal in sarcasm. An officer with excitement spread upon his face came bustling into the court, but paused upon perceiving that the justiciary was speaking. "Your accuser," said Messer de Ferraris, "you have heard already, or at least his accusation, which I pronounce to you. That accusation you are now required to answer." "Required?" said Bellarion, and all marveled at the calm of this man who knew no fear of persons. "By what am I so required?" "Not by the law, which prescribes an accused shall hear his accuser in person, and be given leave to question him upon his accusations. Your Excellency should not be impatient that I stand upon the rights of an accused. Let Messer Barbaresco come forth, and out of his own mouth he shall destroy his falsehood." His manner might impress the general, but it did not conciliate his judge. "Why, rogue, do you command here?" "The law does," said Bellarion, "and I voice the law." "You voice the law." The podesta smiled upon him. "Well, well, I will be patient as you bid me in your impudence. Messer Barbaresco shall be heard." There was an infinite threat in his tone. He leaned back and looked round the court. "Let Messer Barbaresco stand forth." There was a rustle and mutter of expectation through the court, for the stiff-necked young cockerel promised to give good entertainment. Then the excited officer who had lately entered thrust forward into the open space. "Excellency, Messer Barbaresco is gone. He left Casale at sunrise, as soon as the gates were opened, and with him went the 6 whose names were on Messer Bernabo's list. The captain of the Lombard Gate is here to speak to it." Bellarion laughed, and was sternly bidden to remember where he stood, and to observe the decencies. The captain of the Lombard Gate stood forth to confirm the other's tale. A party of 8 had ridden out of the town soon after sunrise, taking the road to Lombardy. One who rode with his arm in a sling he had certainly recognized for my Lord Barbaresco, and he had recognized 3 others whom he named, and a 4th whom he knew for Barbaresco's servant. The regent stroked his chin and turned to the podesta, who was clearly taken aback. "Why was this permitted?" he asked sternly. The podesta was ill at ease. "I had no news of this man's arrest until long after sunrise. But in any case, it is not usual to detain accusers. To detain them, no, but to take certain precautions where the features are so peculiar. Their peculiarity, highness, with submission, becomes apparent only in this flight." The regent sank back in his chair, and his pale blue eyes were veiled behind lowered lids. "Well, well, I interrupt the course of justice. The prisoner waits." A little bewildered, not only by the turn of events, but by the regent's attitude, the podesta addressed Bellarion with a little less judicial sternness. "You have heard, sir, that your accuser is not here to speak in person." Again Bellarion laughed. "I have heard that he has spoken. His flight is an eloquent testimony to the falsehood of his charge." Sir," the podesta admonished him, "you are to satisfy this court. You are to afford us your own version of what took place, that the ends of justice may be served." Now here was a change of tone, thought Bellarion, and he was no longer addressed contemptuously as rogue. He took full advantage of it. "I am to testify? Why, so I will." He looked at the regent, and found the regent's eyes upon him, stern and commanding in a face that was set. He read its message. "But there is little to which I can speak, for I do not know the cause of the quarrel that broke out between Count Spigno and Messer Barbaresco. I was not present at the beginnings. I was drawn to it by the uproar, and when I arrived, Count Spigno was already dead. At sight of me, perhaps because I was a witness and might inform against them, I was set upon by Messer Barbaresco and his friends. I wounded Barbaresco, and so got away, locking myself in a room. I was escaping thence by a window when the watch came up. That is all I can say." It was a tale, he thought, that must convey to the regent the full explanation. But whatever it may have done in that quarter, it did not satisfy the podesta. "I could credit this more easily," said the latter, "but for the circumstance that Count Spigno and yourself were fully dressed, whilst Messer Barbaresco and the others were in their shirts. That in itself suggests who were the aggressors, who the attacked. It might, but for the flight of Messer Barbaresco and the others. Innocent men do not run away. Out of your own mouth you have pronounced it. Thundered the podesta. You profess innocence of association with Lorenzaccio, yet you ran away on that occasion. Oh, but the difference, the appearances against a single man unknown in these parts. Can you explain how you and the dead count came to be dressed and the others not? It was more than a question. It was a challenge. Bellarion looked at the regent, but the regent made no sign. He continued to eye Bellarion coldly and sternly, ready enough to tell the full lie he had prepared. Yet he had the wit to perceive that the regent, whilst not suspecting its untruth, might find the disclosure inconvenient, in which case he would certainly be lost. As a spy, he reasoned, he could only be of value to the regent as long as this fact remained undiscovered. So he took his resolve. Why Count Spigno was dressed, I cannot say. My own condition was the result of accident. I had been to court last night. I returned late, and I was tired. I fell asleep in a chair, and slept until the uproar aroused me. Bellarion fancied that the regent's glance approved him, but the podesta slowly shook his head. A convenient tale, he sneered, but lame. Can you do no better? Can any man do better than the truth? Demanded Bellarion firmly, and in the circumstances impudently. You ask me to explain things that are outside my knowledge. We shall see. The tone was a threat. The hoist has often been known to stimulate a man's memory and to make it accurate. The hoist, Bellarion's spirit trembled. For all that his mien preserved its boldness. He looked again at the regent, this time for succor. The regent was whispering to Messer Aliprandi, and almost at once the orator Milan leaned forward to address the podesta. Might I speak a word in your court, my lord? The podesta turned to him in some surprise. It was not often that an ambassador intervened in the trial of a rogue accused of theft and murder. At your good pleasure, my lord. With submission, then, may I beg that, considering the identity claimed by this prisoner and a relationship urged with his magnificence, the Count of Biandrate, the proceedings against him be suspended until this identity shall have been tested by ordinary means? The ambassador paused. The podesta, supreme autocrat of justice, had thrown up his head, resentful of such very definite interference. But before he could answer, the regent was adding the weight of his support to the orator's request. However unusual this may be, Messer de Ferraris, he said in his quiet, cultured voice, you will realize with me that if the prisoner's identity proved to be as he says, and if his present position should be the result of a chain of unfortunate circumstances, we should by proceeding to extremes merely provoke against Montferrat the resentment of our exalted friend the Count of Biandrate. Thus was it demonstrated to Bellarion how much may hang upon a man's wise choice of a parent. The podesta bowed his head. There was a moment's silence before he spoke. By what means is it proposed that the accused's pretended identity shall be tested? It was Bellarion who spoke. I had a letter from the abbot of the Grazie of Sigliano, which this Lorenzaccio stole from me, but which the officer— We have that letter, the podesta interrupted, his voice harsh. It says nothing of your paternity, and for the rest it can prove nothing until you prove how it was acquired. He claims, Aliprandi interposed again, to come from the convent of the Grazie of Sigliano, where Messer Ficino Cane placed him some years ago. It should not be difficult, nor greatly delay the satisfaction of justice, to seek at the convent confirmation of his tale. If it is confirmed, let one of the fathers who knows him attend here, to say whether this is the same man. The podesta combed his beard in silence. And if so, he inquired at last, why? Then, sir, your mind will be delivered at least of the prejudice created by this young man's association with a bandit, and you will be in better case to judge his share in last night's events. There, to the general disappointment, ended for the moment the odd affair of Bellarion Cane, which in the disclosures it foreshadowed had promised such unusual entertainment. The regent remained in court after Bellarion's removal, lest it be supposed that his interest in the administration of justice had been confined to that case alone. But Messer Aliprandi withdrew, as did most of those others who came from the palace, and amongst them, pale and troubled, went the Princess Valeria. To Deianira she vented something of her dismay and anger. A thief, a spy, a murderer, she said, and I trusted him that he might ruin all my hopes. I have the wages of a fool. But if he were what he claims to be? Mona Deianira asked her, would that make him any less what he is? He was sent to spy on me, that he might discover what was plotting. My heart told me so, yet to the end I heeded rather his own false tongue. But if he were a spy, why should he have urged you to break off relations with these plotters? So that he might draw from me a fuller revelation of my intentions. It was he who murdered Spigno. Spigno the shrewdest, the most loyal and trustworthy of them all. Spigno upon whom I depended to curb their recklessness, and yet to give them audacity in season. And this vile creature, my uncle's, has murdered him. Her eyes were heavy with unshed tears. But if so, why was he arrested? An accident? That was not in the reckoning. I went to see how they would deal with that. And I saw. Madonna Dianera's vision, however, was less clear or else clearer. Yet I do not understand why he should murder the Count. Do you not? The princess laughed a little, quite mirthlessly. It is not difficult to reconstruct the happening. Spigno was dressed, and so was he. Spigno suspected him, and followed him last night to watch him. The scoundrel's bold appearance at court was his one mistake, his inexplicable imprudence. Spigno taxed him with it on his return, pressed him, perhaps, with questions that unmasked him. And so to save his own skin, this Bellarion slew the Count. Why else are the others all fled? Because they know themselves detected. Is it not all crystal clear? The Lady Dianera shook her head. If it was your brother's ruin the Marquis Theodore plotted, this surely frustrates his own ends. If it were as you say, Messer Bellarion would have spoken out boldly in court and told his tale. Why, being what you suppose him, should he keep silent, when by speaking he could best serve the regent's purposes? I do not know, the princess confessed, nor does any ever know the regent's purposes. He works quietly, craftily, slowly, and he will never strike until he is sure that the blow must be final. This rogue's conduct was an obedience to the regent's commands. Did you not see the looks that passed between them? Did you not see that when Messer Aliprandi intervened, it was after a whisper from my uncle? But if this man were not what he says he is, what can the intervention avail in the end? Madonna Valeria was wholly scornful now. He may be what he claims, and yet at the same time what I know him to be. Why not? Where's the contradiction? Yet I dare to prophesy. This Messer Bellarion will not again be brought to trial. The means will be afforded him of breaking prison. Chapter 14 Evasion. Bellarion was returned to the common jail, which was perched high upon the city's red wall, to herd once more with the vile pariahs there incarcerated, but not for long. Within an hour came an order for his removal to a diminutive stone chamber, whose barred, unglazed window looked out upon a fertile green plain to which the broad, silvery ribbon of the river coiled its way towards Lombardy. Thither a little later in the afternoon came the Marquis Theodore to visit him, in quest of the true facts. Bellarion lied to him as fluently as he had lied earlier to the Podesta, but no longer with the same falsehoods. His tale now went very near the truth. He had come under the suspicion of the conspirators last night as a result of his visit to court. Explanations had been demanded, and he had afforded them, as he exactly stated. But conscience making cowards of conspirators, they bound him and locked him in a room until from Sigliano they should have confirmation of his tale. Count Spigno, fearing that his life might be in danger, came in the night to set him free. Which lead me to suspect, said Bellarion, that Count Spigno, too, was an agent of your potencies. No matter. I keep to the events. The conspirators, he continued, were more watchful than Spigno suspected. They came upon the twain just as Bellarion's bonds had been cut, and Spigno had, fortunately, thrust a dagger into his hand. They fell upon Spigno, and one of them, the confusion at the moment did not permit him to say which, stabbed the unfortunate Count. Bellarion would have shared his fate, but that he hacked right and left with fist and dagger, wounding Barbaresco and certainly one other, possibly two others. Thus he broke through them, flung down the stairs, locked himself in a room on the mezzanine, and climbed out of the window into the arms of the watch. If your highness had not desired me to go to court, this would not have happened. But at least the conspirators are fled, and the conspiracy is stifled in panic. Your highness is now safe. Safe! His highness laughed hard and cruelly. There was now in his mien none of that benignity which Montferrat was wont to admire in it. The pale blue eyes were hard as steel. A furrow at the base of his aquiline nose rendered sinister and predatory the whole expression of his countenance. Your blundering has destroyed the evidence by which I might have made myself safe. My blundering. Here's justice. Besides, if I were to give the evidence I withheld from the Podesta, if I were to give a true account of what happened at Barbaresco's, if you did that, the regent interrupted angrily. How would it look, do you suppose? A vagrant rogue, the associate of a bandit, was closeted yesterday with me, and so far received my countenance that he was bidden to court. It would disclose a plot. Indeed, it would be said that I plotted to fashion evidence against my nephew. Do you think that I have no enemies here in Casale and elsewhere in Montferrat besides Barbaresco and his plotters? If Spigno had lived, it would have been different. Or even if we had Barbaresco and the others and could now wring the truth from them under torment. But Spigno is dead and the others gone. Bellarion deemed and bewildered by his own excessive subtleties. Does Barbaresco's flight give no color to my tale? He asked quietly. Only until some other tale is told, as told it would be. Then what of the word of a rascal like yourself? And what of me who depend upon the word of so pitiful a knave? Your Highness starts at shadows. Bellarion was almost contemptuous. In the end, it may be necessary to tell my tale, if I am to save my neck. The regent's look and tone made Bellarion feel cold. Your neck? Why, what does your neck matter? Something to me, however little to your Highness. The regent sneered, and the hard eyes grew harder still. You become inconvenient, my friend. Bellarion perceived it. The regent feared lest investigation should reveal that he had actually fostered the conspiracy for purposes of his own, using first Count Spigno and then Bellarion as his agents. You become inconvenient, he repeated. Duke John Galeazzo would never have boggled over dealing with you. He would have wrung this precious neck, by which you lay such store. Do you thank God that I am not John Galeazzo? He took the cloak from his left arm. From within its fold, he let fall at Bellarion's feet a coil of rope. From his breast, he drew 2 stout files, which he placed upon Bellarion's stool. If you remove one of those bars, that should give you passage. Attach the rope to another, and descend by it at dusk. When you touch ground, you will be outside the walls. Go your ways and never cross the frontiers of Montferrat again. If you do, my friend, I promise you that you shall be hanged out of hand for having broken prison. I should deserve it, said Bellarion. Your Highness need have no anxiety. Anxiety, you dog. The regent measured him with that cold glance a moment, then swung on his heel and left him. Next morning, when it was learned that the prisoner had escaped, wild and varied were the speculations in Casale to explain it, and stern, searching, and fruitless the inquiry conducted by the governor of the prison. None was known to have visited Bellarion save only the Marquis Theodore, and only one person was so mad as to suppose that the regent had made possible the evasion. You see, said the Princess Valeria to her faithful Deianira, has my prophecy been fulfilled? Was I not right in my reading of this sordid page? But in her dark eyes there was none of the exultation that verified conjecture so often brings. And at about the same time, Bellarion, having found a fisherman to put him across the beyond Frassinetto, was trudging mechanically along, safe now in the territory of Milan. But his thoughts went back to Montferrat and the Princess Valeria. In her eyes I am a rogue, a spy, a trickster, and perhaps worse, which matters nothing, for in her eyes I never could have been anything that signifies. Nor does it really matter that she should know why Spigno died. Let her think what she will. I have made her and her brother safe for present. That night he lay at an inn at Candia, and reflected that he lay there at the Princess Valeria's charges, for he still possessed 3 of the 5 ducats she had given him for his needs. Some day, he said, I shall repay that loan. Next morning he was up betimes to resume at last in earnest his sorely interrupted journey to Pavia. But he found that the muses no longer beckoned him as alluringly as hitherto. He had in the last few days tasted stronger waters than those of Castalia's limpid spring. He had also made the discovery that in fundamental matters all his past learning had but served to lead him astray. He questioned now his heresy on the score of sin. It was possible that, after all, the theologians might be right. Whether sin and evil were convertible terms, he could not be sure. But not only was he quite sure that there was no lack of evil in the world, he actually began to wonder if evil were not the positive force that fashions the destinies of men, whilst good is but a form of resistance which, however strong, remains passive, or else, when active, commonly operates through evil that it may ultimately prevail. So much for his syllogism, which had seemed irrefragable. It had fallen to dust at the first touch of worldly experience. Yet, for all his apprehension of the world's wickedness, it was with a sigh of regret that he turned his back upon it. The school of living, striving men called him now with a voice far stronger than that of Pavia and the learned Chrysolaras, and reminded him that he was pledged to a service which he could not yet consider fully rendered.